Guest with me today, Penny is off today, so Jennifer Koenig is joining me today to talk a little bit about chemical dependency services, or at least be able to talk about the direct work happening if there's questions. But Penny put together a nice little outline for the board to share some information, so I'm just going to go through the PowerPoint that has been developed. The first slide is regarding detox services and the amount of money that we have paid for detox services. She put almost a 7-year comparison, and as you can see, the cost for detox services has diminished significantly. In 2010, between 2010 and 2011, detox in Brainerd closed, and once they closed, it's been a reduction in the amount of detox services we've been paying. Doesn't mean the need has necessarily gone away. I think law enforcement has done a nice job of making arrangements for those individuals who are challenged with chemical use after hours, evenings, weekends. And so, on average, we spend $445 a day for anybody that enters detox services. We currently mostly use the Central Minnesota Mental Health Center out of St. Cloud. I would also say probably, and I don't know if Jennifer can speak to this, but I do think law enforcement time is probably spent a little bit longer on those individuals who are using chemicals when they run into them, just because there is not the immediate support. Detox and Brainerd used to actually come and get the clients and take them back to Brainerd. So it really did help law enforcement at that time, but they've done a very nice job in managing, and we do continue to work with them on issues around detox services. Chemical dependency assessments. As you can see, the chemical dependency assessments have kind of varied. 2016 was our highest need, but I think 2017 is going to reach that and move beyond that. It's been a fairly busy 2017 for staff. And again, these are assessments that determine eligibility for treatment. Jennifer does the vast majority of chemical dependency assessments for our agency. And I think, again, we've seen a huge increase in methamphetamine, opioids, and so it just continues to grow. She also works with our children's unit in making sure that parents involved in the child welfare system are accessing treatment when needed. And so it's been fairly busy in 2017. One of the services that we do not get reimbursed for, however, we feel it's a critical service for those individuals, is some case management activities. So Jennifer follows clients who are in treatment, making sure that they're at the right level of treatment. Providers are required to send daily, or is it weekly, reports to you when we are funding the treatment services?
It's supposed to be weekly.
So weekly reports that Jennifer receives on those individuals. So, and she will work with them when they get out of treatment, or do they need a lower treatment level after an inpatient stay or a halfway house stay? Do they need follow-up? And so we currently have 1.1 staff, so it's Jennifer and then a new staff, Kim, who are primarily working the chemical dependency services for our agency.
Mr. Chair, Jennifer, do you work with the drug court then, if any of these clients are part of that?
Yes.
But not all of them are, it's just a.
Right.
Right, and actually the next little snippet is about drug court, so that was a nice transition, thank you. I don't know if yes, so there are currently 18 participants in drug court. It was established in 2014, and you heard Nicole talk a little bit about it at our budget meeting last week when she presented her budget for drug court. They have a probation officer and a surveillance officer assigned. We have Jennifer, who's assigned to drug court and goes up every Wednesday to drug court. It's an evidence-based program. I think it showed very good results in terms of those that participate and complete the program. We currently have 18 participants with 4 graduates. One of the challenges we had, we did have a supported living environment for those who were part of treatment. Ground Zero. Unfortunately, the owner of Ground Zero was not able to continue to provide the services due to medical concerns, and so they were forced to close that supportive living environment. I know a number of drug court recipients went through there, a number of people returning to the community were there. And so I know Penny and Jennifer have talked a little bit about are there other opportunities, but that's been a challenge to find a supportive living environment for those clients returning to our communities. A couple of the changes that may be happening. There was a substance abuse disorder reform, which has been a multi-year process with the state. They're trying to provide a direct access link to treatment for anybody that's in need of treatment. And they're trying to change the Rule 25 requirements to a comprehensive assessment, which may require more time. There is some concern about whether or not counties will be involved in comprehensive assessments.
Excuse me for 1 second, Brad. They're trying to change. The legislature is trying to change.
Thank you, sir. The Department of Human Services is trying to change
Thank you.
how treatment is accessed and provided. So they created a series of legislative changes that were approved last year, which included the direct access to treatment, changes to Rule 25, which goes from Rule 25 to comprehensive assessment. Currently, we are responsible for all Rule 25 assessments for those that are funded by us. We can take other individuals' Rule 25 assessments, but we need to approve them for the funding of treatment. New care coordination services, new peer support services, new withdrawal management, as well as some direct reimbursement for other chemical dependency-related services. I think probably the biggest concern about the new changes, if they all happen as prescribed in 2020, is just the requirement on licensed addiction counselors. They're having them do much more in terms of accessing treatment and providing treatment. As I said, currently we do all the Rule 25s, and under the new rules, Jennifer would not be eligible to complete the assessment because they're wanting an LADC to do them. So the
What's LADC stand for?
licensed addiction counselor.
Thank you.
So my question, excuse me, Mr. Chair, Brad, my question is, does it look like in your crystal ball, this is one more thing that is coming down from somewhere and probably has no funds attached to it, and the county's probably gonna fund it?
There's actually going to probably be more funds attached through health plans. There's, of course, with a crystal ball, there's a lot of things that can happen around health plans. I think more the concern is the counties would not be as involved in chemical dependency services as we could be because of the licensing requirements for completing comprehensive assessments. And then the inability of those that are completing comprehensive assessments to provide treatment services. So I think that's probably the biggest concern, as well as when you look across the state, it will certainly not be a fair representation. Everybody will not have fair access to treatment because of the lack of appropriate credentialed professionals to do the service.
Well, Mr. Chair, who will be completing the comprehensive assessments then?
They have, like a Northern Pines or a effective living center here in town. The concern is, do they have this capacity with their professionals that are licensed to do both the comprehensive assessments as well as provide the treatment necessary for those individuals who are eligible? So I think that's probably the biggest concern about how they're moving this forward, is just the emphasis they're putting on those licensed professionals to do the assessments.
If I may, Mr. Chair, this LACD, is there gonna be an abundance of them licensed out there? That's where
No.
I see, that's what
No
I think.
Problem, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because currently, licensed facilities where they're currently required to be can't find enough of them. So like Northern Pines, for instance, to provide enough groups for all those individuals is challenging because of the professionals the licensed professionals that are not available.
So what do you do about that then?
Well, we're trying to work with the Department of Human Services on could they create a certified assessor type training like they do for Minnesota Choices for those that do comprehensive assessments. I think all the counties have qualified staff that have been doing Rule 25s for how long have you been doing them?
3 years.
For 3 years. that already have good relationships with providers, and so why couldn't we create a system where all of those individuals would not be eligible to complete comprehensive assessments?
Mr. Chair, Brad, I really probably don't have to understand, or maybe I should, or maybe you do. Why is DHS making this change? Because it's something to do?
You know, I think overall they've been trying to make changes to chemical dependency so it is treated similar to any other medical condition. You
Like a
know,
holistic
a
approach.
holistic approach that if you are sick, you can run into the clinic and you can get services right now. And that works great if you want to see somebody for your blood pressure and your temperature, but if you need a knee surgery or something a little bit more major, you're going to go to somebody else. But I do think in terms of chemical dependency services, there's been a gap in how we treat those individuals with that illness compared to other illnesses that have been accepted in general. So they've been trying to make adjustments so that it's treated more like a medical condition. I'm just not entirely convinced they've done it in a way that really still will increase capacity, improve access because of the expectations of LADCs, which really was the goal of it.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Mr. Chair, I guess Jennifer, do you have anything to add about this work and the business you do and what challenges you see from Morrison County perspective?
The biggest challenge is with the loss of the sober house. That was absolutely detrimental. With these new changes coming up, there are some good changes. The peer support specialist would be a really good asset to have to give to a client, the care coordination. So then it just extends services because we can't just send somebody to treatment and they're gonna come out and they're gonna be fixed. They have to have support in the community where they come back because that's where they're gonna fail. People don't typically fail in treatment, they fail when they come back and they're surrounded by old friends, old using places. So adding these additional services is really going to help support them in their recovery, extended periods of time, more than the 3 to 6 months we can get people help right now.
I think that's a really good point. Probably one of the issues with chemical dependency has been the fact that when they're done with treatment, they come back to the community and really have no ongoing support. And that's really probably the best change that's gonna happen is that they will continue the ongoing support. I still think there's gonna be issues with access to treatment and the immediate ability to enter treatment, which is what they're trying to do.
Mr. Chair, could you explain that sober house, the process? They are in treatment, then they go to sober house, and then they go home? Is that how it works?
Yeah, so what ends up happening when somebody goes into treatment, generally they've probably been behind on their bills, they may have lost their housing, they don't have any support. So this is kind of that transitional home for them to go from treatment into a place that is paid for through group residential housing. They provide some support services, and then in the meantime, they will look for a new apartment or a new home or whatever the case might be. Instead of either coming home and being homeless, going back to the same environment they might have come from, which was a using environment, those kinds of things.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I guess, Jennifer, you're gonna have to become a licensed.
Yeah, obviously.
Well,
One more thing.
Yeah, one more thing.
Well, it really doesn't make any sense to have a program to start that people have to be licensed for, that there's no people for,
Yeah.
to try to make something better.
The only thing I would say is part of the reason behind it is if you have a mental health challenge, you're going to a mental health professional for a diagnosis. So they tried to align it with that, but unfortunately in this world, it doesn't necessarily line up as nice with mental health services as it does with chemical dependency services, so.
Mr. Chair, Brad, it's almost like the cart before the horse. We know there's an issue. We're very well aware of that. And now all of a sudden, Big Daddy, DHS, is saying this is what we're gonna do, but we don't have vendors to do it. And you have to have the vendor. I just don't get that part.
Yeah,
It makes no, it's total power. It's
Well,
total.
absolutely, it just, I don't
it
get
is,
that part.
it can be frustrating, definitely, and hopefully, we're 2 years out from this, and so hopefully, in the meantime, we'll come to some consensus that might make it better services for those that are seeking treatment, as well as quicker access.
And you sit on or talk to these folks, you have meetings with these folks, you're on those committees, I know you are, so that gets expressed. I know it
Yep.
does.
Yep.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, I know like Northern Pines is struggling with this too, but if they do get someone, it's temporary because they can go anywhere once they
Yep.
get this license. And
Yep.
you-
That's why we don't want Jennifer to get the license.
No,
And we don't want her to go anywhere,
I
so.
don't think so.
But there are some positives
Yeah,
coming
yeah,
out of some of the changes too, like Jennifer said, and I think it's important to note that it isn't, you know, there are some components that there really seem to make sense in terms of moving forward.
It's really
So
the
good.
front end, I think, that we're concerned about. The back end looks really good. So,
You know, can I back up to detox a little bit?
Yes.
When it was 40,000, what do we do with those people now? You say we go to St. Cloud,
Yep.
right? Do we keep more people in jail early, or does detox only go when you're over a certain limit? You automatically go to detox?
I think it depends on the person's behavior. The jail has standards about admissions, depending upon what level they are in terms of their chemical use, their blood alcohol content, which has not changed. So my guess is probably a few more people are going to jail when they're arrested for a chemical-related offense, but still they have the same standards as before. I think law enforcement is using better supports than they used to when they could just send them to detox. It was the quick fix. But we continue to talk with law enforcement. I don't think more people are ending up in jail because of this. There's a whole bunch of other things related to other challenges within the community. But just because we don't use detox as much, I don't know that those folks are ending up in jail as much.
Well, there's just $60,000 difference
Yeah.
between that time period, and if, I don't know, it just doesn't seem like, it seems like that fee would have to go somewhere.
Well, Mr. Chair, I would hope that all of our efforts of education, and if we take a look at that graph,
That could be.
you know, I would hope that some of that reflects on our education, that, you know, we're not talking about yesterday anymore, we're talking about today, and we see the curve's going
Yeah, and there's
down.
no question
So
about
I'm
that.
hoping, I'm
Yeah.
hopeful that that truly is working.
I think, Mr. Chair, law enforcement officers just know the cost is gonna be direct, or know the time is gonna be a commitment for them when they have to transport. Before it was a phone call that somebody came and got them. Now it's a little bit more effort put into finding somebody who can come pick them up, or finding some other resources. It's a time
Yep.
and
Yep.
and dollar commitment, so
Yep.
they recognize it.
I was on the board when Brainerd Detox closed, and law enforcement was really worried, but
Yep.
it came out okay. You know, they
Yep.
had to do things
Yep.
different, and so it's worked.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you for your work.
Thank you, Jennifer.
All right, we are going to become the Emily Show for a little bit. Come on in, Emily. Oh, first off, that's right, Carmen is here too. So Carmen Genske is our new employee. You want to stand up and introduce yourself and what your role is in public health?
Hello, Carmen.
Hi, so I was.
You might have seen her here in another capacity.
Yeah, okay.
She's not new here.
No, yeah, so I used to be with the extension office, I was their staff educator, and now I'm the new health educator, environmental specialist for public health. So I
Excellent.
joined on the
Well,
14th.
welcome aboard.
Thank you. Yes,
Glad-
thank you.
I'm glad he brought you.
Yeah, so she's gonna sit back and watch,
Yes.
because she will be doing some of the things that maybe Emily has done, so.
You can stay there.
You can stay, absolutely.
Okay, then.
All right, so we're gonna be the Emily Show for a couple of rounds here. So she put together a couple of presentations for you, and the first one is on responsible beverage server training. So I will turn it over to Emily. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Morning.
Okay, so the first presentation is about responsible beverage server training. This training is a free training we offer to all of our alcohol vendors, and they don't have to be full-time vendors. They could just be a special event too, so we do those. They're two different trainings. The first training, like I said, it's free, so we suggest that the owner of the establishment as well as their employees attend. Everyone that would serve alcohol in the establishment. This training, the responsible beverage server training, is a full-scale training, so it's about an hour. It runs through guidelines like checking IDs, monitoring behavior so they know when to stop serving, safe serving practices, and then the penalties they could go through if they serve someone too much or underage, all those things. With this training, we have offered the discounted licenses, and the handout that I just passed around kind of walks through the different like levels, because they're all broken down, what kind of liquor they send, on sale, off sale, all that kind of stuff. So this is just a handout showing what we have decided to do with that.
So even though it's free, it's not technically free
Right.
because they would get a reduction in their license if they chose to attend responsible beverage server training. So we kept the fees the same for 17. However, if they don't go, the fee goes up. The license fee goes up, so.
Didn't we do that last year, or the
year.
year before, where the
Yeah.
fees went up and we decided to give them a break if they went to
Yep.
this?
Yeah.
Yep,
Okay.
I think that was within the last year or so. And these trainings are put on in partnership with the Sheriff's Office, the local PD, and then Public Health. There's 3 of us trained at Public Health, so Carmen is now trained, Melissa, and then myself,
And Michelle.
and
Yep.
Michelle. Yep, so we are all trained.
So we're transitioning this particular service into environmental health, which is what Carmen and Michelle Warrenberg do. And so they are with the establishments, they will then provide that server training as well, so.
So the next couple slides just kind of break down numbers comparing the last year to this year. Alcohol licenses are approved at the beginning of June, so these statistics run July 1st to July 1st of like 2015, 2016, and then 2016 to 2017. So this first slide is the number of classes we have offered. This is the full-scale training again. In 2015, 2016, we offered 4, and this year we upped it to 5. We offered them at different points of the day, so we had them in the afternoons and the evenings, and we did find that afternoons were more popular for more people. The next slide is showing the number of establishments we have trained. So 2015, 2016, there were 17 trained, and then this year there were 31 trained. It's a little bit complicated to tell the numbers because we have 30 licensed for hard liquor and then 32 licensed for malt liquor. So they can apply on both sides, so it doesn't fully capture, but we can see we're training more. But so they could have 2 sections of the license, like they could sell both hard liquor and malt liquor.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I can't remember, how did we do this as far as, are they required every year to take this training to receive the discount, correct?
Correct, every year. Yep, yep, every year.
And that's who's required, if they send anyone, or is it always the manager or the owner?
I don't know if that's actually
So
specified.
I don't think it is either.
I think it's, if they
As
can
long as they send
anyone.
one, if it's
Right.
that would be,
Right.
okay, all right.
You know, Mr. Chair, if I may, I've been to several of these, and it's amazing, you know, when new people come, especially. When there's new people that attend responsible beverage server training, how their eyes are opened after the end of that hour. It's truly, it's an amazing thing, because they, oh, you really? When you go through everything that there is, oh, we should do that? We can do this? And people just don't know.
Right.
But it truly, it's a very worthwhile program.
It is.
I think.
Well, question I have these rates we have here for people that take it, if an establishment takes it through their insurance company, they'll get the same thing, right?
You know, I've heard that I think insurance companies will give you a reduction in your insurance rates if you do this, but I don't think it's across the board
Okay.
for all insurance companies. But the establishments would know that better than we would, because we don't really get involved in their insurance.
Okay, insurance
So-
rate, but I mean, what I'm saying is if insurance company comes in and does this for those establishments, will they'll get this even though they didn't come to Morrison County to do it? Am I right?
I don't know that we've run across anybody that says I can't make it and our insurance company
Okay,
provided
okay,
it, so.
because I know some, maybe they don't do it anymore. A few years ago, I knew several insurance companies that did it themselves.
We'll have to pay attention to that. I'm not sure if Mary,
Okay.
who does the licenses, has indicated that anybody said, we took this through our
Okay.
insurance company. Does it still, I don't know why we wouldn't accept an
Who
insurance
knows?
company that would provide
And
a
maybe
responsible.
insurance companies have quit it,
Yeah,
you know.
And maybe they've always just sent an attendee regardless of ours, that we haven't come across that question, that's a good one.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, do we also, when their license is up, in July, right? But when we send a notification, which includes, I'm assuming, that they have the opportunity to take this beverage, there's probably a pamphlet in there or something like that, right?
Yep, we do tell them all the information. And then through the TZD program, the Towards Zero Deaths, we also have the opportunity to promote this class, so we have been sending out mailings through that as
So
well.
they don't have any excuse
Right,
basically to say,
right,
well,
they
I
know.
don't know about it.
Yeah.
They know.
So this next slide kind of breaks it down for the individual, so that's all the employees, managers, owners that would come to the training. So as you can see, we significantly increased from the previous year, so 64 to 113.
so just given this statistic, I guess more than one came from every establishment, so.
So then the special event trainings, it's really similar, it's just condensed a little bit, and it's for those single day or weekend, so the concerts and the fairs and the festivals, that kind of thing. But they suggest that all like the current staff and the new staff, so they try to get everybody to these, just because it's like a one-day thing, and all volunteers as well. So we offered 2 in the past, and this year we offered 5. We just kind of combined them with the same days of our trainings for the full-scale training. So we did the full-scale training, we had about a half an hour break, and then we do the special event training. With that, there were 6 altogether that received this special event license, 5 that sold hard liquor, and 1 that sold the 3-2 malt liquor. So this is the event, so really, last year, we had 1 event trained, and this year we had 2 events trained. So out of the 6 that we licensed, only 2 came to this, so maybe that's another opportunity to make sure they know that this is available to them. And then with that, the individuals, 2 compared to 9, so for the events, the 2 events that were licensed, 9 participants showed up. And then the last thing, we do have some projected dates that we are coordinating with Sheriff's Office, local PD to give trainings at, and we have to decide on the location still due to the construction here. So that is still up in the air, but we like to do them well before licenses are due. The applications are due, just so they have many opportunities to attend and send as many people as they can.
Mr. Chair, so our special events that we don't have a lot of participants, am I reading that right?
Correct.
And do we give them a break on their cost of their license for the special events also? I guess I'm missing that. I'm not seeing it.
It's not on there, we'll have to take a look, and I'm not sure.
Because I think that that's a pretty important thing to have that also. I know that in Swanville, a year or 2 ago, I can't remember.
It's more than that.
Whatever it is,
It's
but
time
I
to
know
do
that the
another one.
entire
Yep.
group of
Lions Club.
Lions Club,
We hadn't, so.
We're involved
I'll be
in it.
talking to you again.
I know it's a
Probably
big deal, so.
That would
Yeah.
be great.
So what do you,
We had about 60 of them at that meeting that night. They came to Swanville and did it. It's about time we do another one, I think.
Yeah. that would be
Did
good.
you go out to Swanville, or
I
did?
did not.
No, I don't think she was there. I forget who was there.
Michelle?
I think Michelle
Mm-hmm.
was, pretty sure. But it's been 4 or 5.
And I'm not picking on Swanville, but there's
Yeah.
other special events that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, most of the churches have a special event, there's one in the board packet today for,
Absolutely.
but that's at the ballroom, so I think a lot of them are
Yeah.
using the
Those-
ballroom, which
yep,
are already
those are
trained.
different.
And then when you talk about in Swanville, our liquor license comes from the city. It doesn't even come from the county, so, but I mean, that's no reason. Everybody
Yeah.
can still take it.
Right. Retraining, yeah, that would be
so how do you
great.
do that, a special event, like, let's take Freedom Fest, for instance, and a bunch of other vendors come in there?
I don't do a bunch of vendors sell beer,
Are we talking just beer here?
it's just,
Yep.
Beer and liquor.
Yep.
well, beer and liquor, it's
Oh,
just
okay,
booze.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yep.
I was
Yeah.
thinking of all your food vendors and stuff that come into the thing, so,
And I think in terms of a liquor license, again, they are using the Legion maybe for the liquor license.
More than
And
likely.
so
or a bar.
they're probably, a lot of these folks might be attending via the establishment versus the special event. And maybe that's something we'll have to pay attention to as well, because again, some of these special event licenses are based off a liquor license of somebody else just because of the liability and the insurance and,
Because most of those special events, everybody's volunteering their time.
Yep.
That's what most of them are doing. You're getting a bunch of people together, so you must have somebody in charge that knows what's supposed to be done.
yeah.
What I see, if you got money, they sell it to you if you're of age.
Hopefully.
Okay.
So, okay,
Any other questions on responsible beverage server training? Well, I'd like to turn this one over to Emily as well. I mentioned.
Thank goodness we have you. My goodness.
I mentioned at planning meeting last week that we did our tobacco compliance checks. And so Emily's here to do a little report out on the tobacco compliance checks, and our ordinance actually indicates that we're supposed to do this at or our policy actually indicates we're supposed to do this at planning, but it's been a while since we've done them, so we want to get the letters out. And this is as good a venue as a planning session, so I'll turn it over to Emily. Thank you again.
So we did complete our tobacco compliance, end of July, the last couple weeks in July. Went out for 2 days. Just a little bit of background. It's written into our ordinance that we updated this last year, that we check, that we are able to check more than once a year, but we legally have to check once a year. So this is a partnership between student groups. This year we went with the Little Falls School District and then Public Health and the Sheriff's Office. We want to make sure that public health is a resource for all of our vendors, so we are not just saying, you were doing this wrong. We want to be the person that they can ask questions to, and give them any resources. So we want to do those things so we can move towards 100% compliance in the future. We don't want to be the bad guys. We're not in it just for the money. We want to back them completely and say, here's what you can do to make safe sales. Here's what we can do to grow stronger as a community. We also have access to resources like Clearway. I don't know if you've seen some of those advertisements, but they're really into the comparing like tobacco products to like candy products. They want to get away from youth tobacco use. And then Answer, which is the Association of Non-Smokers in Minnesota. And they all have really great resources that we can provide too. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the rest of the presentation. Youth use of conventional tobacco, so cigarettes and such, is declining, but like e-cigarettes are on the rise, so we want to make sure that all of those things are covered when we do tobacco compliance checks. And then, just as a little bit of background, nearly all tobacco users start before the age 18, so if we can stop them before they start, then we have less tobacco users in the future. We do have law enforcement assist us, so during the checks we have a deputy that goes along, myself, and then a couple students. And if the establishment were to fail, the deputy would go in and report or tell them what is happening and next steps, and we found that works really well. Everyone kind of responds really well to the deputies, and I'm always available to go in with them if they have any questions too. With our student buyers, we usually use organizations like Epic and Peers and Stand Up For You. This year we did use Stand Up For You, so they have to be over the age of 15, under the age of 18, and they have to have a hard card license. They can't just have a permit or a paper. And we like to use both males and females. This year, only males were able to go. So we had 3 16-year-old boys join us, and they did a really good job. They had some really powerful takeaways, and they're ready to take this conversation back to the peers in their school too, which is awesome.
And as Commissioner Lemire's heard at the Public Health Advisory Committee, one of the youth that participated is an advisory member and shared kind of what he went through to prepare for this and how he did it, and so it was interesting information to hear it actually from one of the youth, so.
Great. So then we do go through a training with the youth buyers. We usually do it prior to the check, and we just do it right before we go throughout the day. We kind of go through what's going to happen, the process of each check, the guidelines, so they can't alter their appearance, they can't lie about their age. If they feel uncomfortable or if they know someone in the store, they are able to leave. And then we do go through tobacco products too, just because not all students know types of tobacco products. And then we do some role playing too, just because it's awkward the first couple times. So they kind of get into it after a while. And then we run through different scenarios, like issues, like if this clerk would take their license, what they would do. The deputy will go in and get it and talk to them, but just making sure they know all the situations they might run into and that they feel comfortable with everything. So the process, the kids arrive, we go through the training, we do a lot of paperwork, so we take photos of them the day of. We do a pocket check to make sure they don't have tobacco products in their pocket already. They have a consent form that their parents and they sign, and then a copy of their license. If the check is failed, we go in with all of this information, say, here's what, here's the student that came in, here's the license, so you can know what it looks like, and here's a picture of them today. We talk through introductions with the deputy, and then we kind of go through a plan of where we're gonna go throughout the county, and we do the checks. We went twice this year, Monday, July 24th in the afternoon, so noon to 4, and then Monday, July 31st from 9 to noon. We did 3 students on the 24th and 2 students on the 31st, and 2 different deputies did escort us, and I am the one that goes with, and I file all the paperwork and fill out the form that we go through to make sure we're getting all the information. So the results, 24 passed, 6 failed, and they're listed right there. And then we're unable to check 8 of them for various reasons. They weren't open, students knew the workers, that kind of stuff. And I do have some suggestions later in this PowerPoint of how we can kind of take those out of the mix. We're making
Mr.
sure
Chair,
we're checking.
I have a question. This is quite a few more than last year, am I right?
Yes, significantly.
What was our last year?
2.
Ooh.
Yes. So, as a follow-up, so I passed it on to our director. I'm presenting to you at county board now, and the paperwork will be mailed after we talk to you all here. And then after all of that, a memo is delivered to the sheriff, the commissioners, the auditor, and the attorney. So when the payments come in, or if they have a dispute, everyone kind of knows what's going on. So that will be sent out after this.
Did the e-cigarettes, did that count on here for tobacco when you're going in
Yep.
and asking
Yep.
if somebody asked for an e-cigarette and you gave it to them, that would count as a
Correct.
failing?
That would count.
Do you know if that was the situation
There
here?
were no e-cigarettes asked
Okay,
for,
okay,
but
okay.
it would
That's
even
good to know.
be, like any tobacco paraphernalia in general,
Okay.
like pipes, if you just bought a pipe and not the tobacco, that still counts,
Okay.
Oh, it does.
yeah.
Mr. Chair, Emily, and if this is too early, if you're gonna cover this, please just tell me to shut up. The 6 that failed,
Yep,
immediately you, along with the deputy, walked into the establishment and presented, you failed.
right.
Can you tell me how that went?
Yes, I can, and I don't know if I talk about it. It went fairly well. It's not the worst thing. We did have some repeat sellers, which was an issue, and that was unfortunate. And there was one person that it was their first day. There was one person where it was his last, like he was an elderly gentleman, it was his last day, but it still happens. And then there was one person that said they thought the license was, to buy tobacco, the age was 16. So I think it's like an educational component on all those, if it is your first day.
Yep.
Make sure you have the training before you start.
Yeah.
So, just kind of an educational thing. Everyone took it very well. The managers were all very
Okay.
professional about it, and we just really want to make sure they know that we are here as a resource. We are,
Thank you.
If I may, what is the consequences?
we
That
will
will-
go through
yeah,
that.
that
Yeah.
will be coming
Yes.
up.
That is coming.
Yeah, that is
Yes.
coming. And maybe that was coming too, but
Yeah.
that
I'm
we
not
know for sure
about
is
that,
coming.
yeah. So my recommendation recommendations for the checking process to kind of avoid those ones that we couldn't check were to start later in the day. Many of the majority that we couldn't check that weren't open was that morning section. So after 11 would probably be best, and some of them even like after like 4:30 some days, because it's not in the middle of the day, it's when other, people are getting off work and stopping places. So I would be okay with setting up some evening checks. And then we did have the unmarked police van, but it still looks like an unmarked police van. So they do have an undercover car, and we just want to make sure that that's available for us to use as well. I think all these will make our checks more authentic and significant with our numbers. And my other recommendation would be to do a training opportunity similar to the responsible beverage server training. In the past, WeCard was a big one, and you've probably seen the calendars, like you have to be 18. But those are all backed by the big tobacco companies, so public health in general wants to stay away from those. So that's where our Clearway and Answer, the Association for Non-Smokers, come in. They have online trainings that we can give, and we could even set something up like responsible beverage server training and have public health be the trainers. And maybe have a license cost break again with the same, very similar to the responsible beverage server training. They have videos that can be completed online, but it might be better to just get all together in a group, ask questions, have that open communication instead of here, do this. We want to support them and say, here's how we can help you do this. And then, so these are our recommendation for fines, so we would like to change them possibly. So our first offense right now, $75 for the establishment, within 24 months. So right now, we would kind of like to bump it up, and maybe with having that break in there, then it could go back down to 75. We're open, but we just would like to throw some options out. The second offense within 24 months, right now is set at 200, so we'd like to bump it up to 250. The third offense right now is set at 250 with a 7-day suspension. And then anything after that, we revoke their license. Well, it is brought to you to decide if the license would be revoked or not. And then the clerks right now, every time a clerk sells, no matter how many times they've sold, it's a $50 fine. But we were thinking we could change it as a warning with a learning component. So if you failed, you would have to be required to go to this training if we decide to offer them. Just a thought there.
And that would be brought during the budget
We bring it to a planning meeting.
Okay.
And then it'd be
talk
part
about
of the budget process and the fee schedule.
Okay.
Yeah. It really wouldn't be any more money to public health, hopefully, because they would all attend the learning opportunity and not pay extra, so.
Well, we certainly have seen success in the implementation of that on the beverage serving component of it, so I think it's certainly something we should
Absolutely.
discuss
Yeah.
anyway and see what
Considering
you
it went
guys
up from
think.
two to 6.
So, Mr. Chair, I
Yeah.
believe I know the answer to this question, but I sell the minor, whatever it is.
Yep.
Am I getting pinched, if you will, or is the business getting?
Right now, both are. So you would be
Both.
charged $50,
Okay.
and the business would be charged $75 if
Okay.
it was their
Yeah.
first
Okay.
offense.
Okay.
Moving forward, we would
Goes both
change
ways.
those.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. And then, you're fine. It kind of goes through all the laws and everything that is within our ordinance as well. And then it does, those two links are for the really helpful resources and possible trainings.
And then I did also attach the public health policy around tobacco compliance check, so you can just take a look at that in your leisure time but I do think this is one of the things that Emily and Michelle, before she left, and I talked about is this again another opportunity to promote in a way that isn't necessarily punishment, but rewarding those who would like to attend. And I believe, Emily, correct me if I'm wrong, but you did a something similar to this in Cass County for a while.
Yep.
So very in tune to some of those activities. So anyway, that's what we'll be bringing forward to planning once we create the at least some form of a class and.
And that really, Mr. Chair, is the purpose of public health, is to educate, is to prevent issues that are occurring. So supporting that and expanding that is great when we find that it
Yep.
works.
And again, just a number of the things we're involved with Stand Up For You and the Peers Area Coalition and Towards Zero Death and, keeping kids away from alcohol and tobacco are critical in hoping they grow healthier, so.
Well, if we're gonna support Stand Up For You, if we're gonna support all of these programs, but we're not willing to support doing something about it, then I think we're the wrong ones as much as anybody else. So.
Other questions for Emily or
No, thank you very
Carmen?
much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
I'll be talking to you, Emily.
Thank you.
Sounds good, just let me know anytime. All right,
Thank you.
Thank you.
feel loving.
All right, I have a couple more things under public health. The first thing is a request to approve Eric Goodrich as the District 3 member to the Morrison County Public Health Advisory Committee. I shared that with you at planning last week, and we need the formal approval today.
So moved.
Got a
Second.
motion by Commissioner Wincher, seconded by Commissioner Johnson. Any further discussion? If none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries.
The next thing I have before you is a request to approve a contract between Morrison County Public Health and Piers Schools for school nursing. And again, we've brought this to planning on 2 occasions. Katie brought it in June and I brought it a couple weeks ago. Piers School has hired a nurse who is not yet qualified to provide school nursing services, so they need some oversight of signing of health plans and IEP documents and things like that. And so in conversations with peers, they would like our organization to help. And the reality is that you have to actually be a PHN, public health nurse, to be qualified to do school nursing. And so it just made sense for us to partner with peers. It would be anywhere up to 8 hours per month, so not a huge time commitment of our agency. And we're using a nurse that's already doing some activities around maternal child health and are working with our agency on a parent support outreach program, so they're involved with children and families. And so it does make sense, I think, to support peers in this endeavor, and they're looking forward to it. So I would ask for your approval to authorize us to charge $55 per hour, up to 8 hours per month to peer schools, and signing the agreement.
I'll make the motion, Mr. Chair.
Got a motion by Commissioner Lemire, seconded by Commissioner Jelinski. Any further discussion? If none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries.
Have to see which one is next I missed. Okay, so we have a request to approve a 1-day temporary on-sale liquor license for the Habitat for Humanity fundraiser at the ballroom on October 20th.
I would so move on that, Mr. Chair.
Got a motion by
Second.
Commissioner Johnson, seconded by Commissioner Lemire. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries.
And then we have 2 establishment licenses for your approval. The first is new establishment, the Leaning Silo Folk and Homestead School in Swanville. Owner Timothy Poland, and an annual license for additional services. I believe Royalton is licensing a second kitchen now in their new addition, so need approval for those 2
I would
licenses.
so move on those. Mr.
Second.
Chair.
Got a motion by Commissioner Johnson, seconded by Commissioner Wincher. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries.
And I believe that's it. All right,
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
thank
Brad.
you. Have a good day.
Thank you, Brad.
Okay, next, Land Services, Amy.
Good morning.
Good morning, Miss Amy.
Okay, I have a few things for you today. The first one is to consider the conditional use permit request from Chad and Teresa Sweeney, and this is to expand to a Tier 2 feedlot. This was recommended for approval by the Planning Commission with 5 conditions, and the conditions on that one were abide by local and state law, notify the road authority when hauling manure during road restrictions, abide by the good neighbor, stormwater, and feedlot odor minimization plans, plant and maintain a 50-foot wide grass buffer around the perimeter of the barns after construction for ongoing stormwater management, and the property owner shall notify the feedlot office of clean-out activity.
Can I get a motion to
So
accept
moved.
this?
Second.
Got a motion by Commissioner Wincher, seconded by Commissioner Lemire. Is there any further discussion?
If I may, again, we were at this meeting and it was very well thought out, very well attended. And again, I just appreciate the people that were there and the county board and the planning commission, because again, a lot of information was given and I believe everybody did their part.
Well, Mr. Chair, and if I can go a little further on that, there was absolutely a lot of information. There was a lot of concern also at the same time, and the concern centered around nitrates. Thank you.
Sorry.
It wasn't there, but thank you. Concern, the biggest part that I got out of it anyway, centered around nitrates and what causes them. Is it manure? Is it chicken manure? Is it pig manure? Is it manure? I don't know. Is it commercial fertilizer? And from anything that I'm truly understanding is we really don't know the answer to that question. And it also centered around storage of manure. And if I want to be straight on this, because I've actually thought about this quite a bit and had a couple people talk to me about it, is that in Morrison County, you can short-term stack manure outside, and short-term is up to 1 year.
Correct, on appropriate soils.
So my first question would be is, do we maintain a record as to what appropriate soils are? And I'm anticipating we don't, I don't know that. Because if I am cleaning out my barn and I'm gonna say, yeah, I've got some appropriate soil out back and that's where I'm gonna dump it, it's gonna stay there for a year and it's gonna leach off to wherever, do I really have that appropriate soil? In all of those conversations of the 4 or 5 barns that we're talking about today and talked about at the planning commission meeting, we also talked about stacking slabs. Stacking slabs to prevent, if you will, leaching, runoff, whatever it might be. If you can really put that pile of manure wherever, as long as it's okayed, as long as the soil is okay for up to a year, it's a long time. And there was an awful lot of people with that concern. I don't have the answers for those questions, obviously. And one of the other ones I think that we have to talk about sooner than later is how many chicken barns, pig barns, cattle barns, cow barns, whatever, can you have in a 1 square mile area? I mean, it truly was brought up by the people that were here, and whether that answer, and we're not going to get that answer, I realize today, but I think it's a discussion that this board has to have. There was concern. I'm certainly not against any farmer, and I'm not in the least little bit, but it was concerns from other people that were brought forth. So, all I've got.
Do you want me to- go ahead, yeah.
That I'd like to say, first of all, I wasn't here. I was on vacation. I apologize for that. All these barns come up in my area the week I am gone. But I did have some phone calls and some concerns about nitrates and so forth. I guess I was looking at some maps and it looks like the nitrate problem is kind of in the sand area along the Mississippi, all the way from maybe Perham down to southern Minnesota. Do you know, have nitrates been stronger lately? You've done a lot of water samples, I think, Helen. Have things gone up in this area? Or 30 years ago before, because I can remember when a lot of people gave land back because it was worthless till irrigation came along. And then we started irrigating. So were the nitrates high back in those times, or do we not know? Or is it, I don't know, I guess, it's a concern. These people have a concern over nitrates, and it should be. And we need to address something. I don't know what that is, but if there's a lot of barns that are gonna go up in massive amounts, we need to be prepared for that, what we're gonna do. I'm not saying I'm for barns, but we need to do things right. And I don't know what that answer is. But I think that we've had this discussion before when we've had barns come up. So I think there's a point where we need to start trying to figure out what's right. And I don't wanna look at restrictions without knowing we're right. Just to restrict, because I don't think that's fair either. So, I don't know, can anybody answer any of my questions, or?
Well, I did have some conversation with Helen and from the Soil and Water Conservation District, and they've been doing voluntary nitrate testing for over 20 years. And so, but formal tracking of that data really didn't occur until 2009. The equipment that is provided is from the USDA, and so they are provided with the sample results as well. And so over time, of course, there has been a pattern that's emerged that kind of along the Mississippi River corridor and a little bit east and west of that, where we have those sandy or well-drained soils, we've seen nitrates, elevated nitrates, and we've seen that for the last 20-some years. So that nitrates can be naturally occurring. The most difficult thing is wrapping your arms around what exactly, and there may not be one source of nitrate. It can be a compilation of all of it, and then with the soil conditions there, it's a perfect match to migrate nitrates into the water. So to answer the question, yes, I think there's been knowledge that there's always been higher than normal nitrates in those areas. We're seeing them go up. We're seeing more samples. Of course, these are voluntary samples, so we're at the mercy of what data set we're working with because of what people have tested. That's not arguable. We have high nitrates in some areas in Morrison County, concerning high nitrates. And
Could you explain
agri-township
what's
is
the
one of
definition
them.
of high? I know.
Yes, no,
Nitrate.
10 parts per million and lower is the safe drinking water standard. Anything above that is considered high and should have treatment to bring that level down. So we're seeing in some of those areas 30, 40, 50, 60 parts per million, significantly higher than what it needs to be. Now, that's the million-dollar question though. Why? Why? And so, of course, those are all of the things that we need to take into consideration of sources of nitrates. And we know they're sources of nitrates. We will get it in manure. We will get it in commercial fertilizer. We will get it in failing septic systems. We will get it because it's naturally occurring in the soils. All of those things together more than likely contribute to that. And so that, and really it's not the barn that's the issue, it's the manure. The barn is a total confinement system.
Absolutely.
But it's where that manure is going, and whether or not we have adequate crop rotation, uptake from the crops to handle the nitrogen that's being put on the soil. I mean, that's really what has to be focused on.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Amy, when we talk about where is the manure going, it's very easy to say, I have a paper here signed by 14 different farmers that say that we're taking your manure, whatever the case is. Are we tracking any of that?
When you apply for a tier 2 or up through a tier 4, part of a complete application is a manure management plan. So you have to identify how much manure you anticipate you're going to generate, what the nitrogen and phosphorus content is, and then that you've identified either you own enough acres of your own to handle that, and most people are working with a consultant at that point because they're testing their soils to see, okay, what's the demand from the crop, what naturally, or what do we have for nitrate contact already. So that's part of an application, it is the manure management part. If you're handling your own manure and putting it on your own acreage. If you're transferring the manure, then you still are required to identify what the nitrogen and phosphorus content is in that manure, and the amount that you anticipate you're going to generate, and then that you've identified adequate acreage for that manure to be transferred. So that is a part of the feedlot rules, the Minnesota feedlot rules that we've been delegated to enforce and apply from the state. So that's part of that, is looking at that manure management. And then, of course, for the stockpiles, there's also standards for stockpiling, the types of soils, the length of time, the proximity to many different features, such as wells, waters of the state, wetlands, all of that. So all of that together is what we're looking at. on top of the location of the barn and setbacks for that.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I know you're bringing up stockpiling and force.
Yes.
I drove around in my area here a few weeks ago, and there's a lot of stockpiling. Who determines whether that is the renter? Maybe they're renting the land to someone, or it's the landowner himself. Who determines whether that stockpile of manure is there for 1 month, a year, and the soil? Do they have to call up and say, hey, I'm stockpiling here on section such and such?
Unfortunately not. They're not notifying us of that. What they are doing though is when we see those management plans, if stockpiling is part of their management regime, they will identify that, and then we're checking to say, okay, where are you stockpiling and are the soils correct for that? If the manure is transferred, the person receiving the manure is not relieved just because they're not the conditional use permit applicant or recipient. They're not relieved of the state manure storage requirements. And so if we have a complaint or we're aware that there is manure being stockpiled for longer than a year or in too close proximity to some of those areas, then we're dealing with that particular property owner on proper storage.
How would you determine if it's been there a year or longer?
That's a tough one. No doubt about it. We don't have a hard and fast way to be able to know when that pile appeared on site and how long it's been there.
And one last question, driving around again, I noticed some of these stockpiles are closer to the roads than they should be. Is there a law that says you can be within 10 feet or 100 feet? Again, I know that.
Yes, there's setbacks, but one of the biggest things is you can't have runoff from the pile going to a public ditch or to a public water. And so when we are aware of those, then we're working with that producer to move the pile and also working with them on a more adequate and acceptable spot to stockpile in the future. That is one of the other things that we're charged with from the state feedlot program is an ongoing education. And so in addition to all of the enforcement that we do, oversight and permitting, one of the other things is education. And so that's a component of the program as well. And so when we're registering feedlots and all of that, we're focusing on, okay, what education piece needs to go out. And so that is an active part of our office as well, is communicating what those standards are, what you need to do, and all of that. And so that is another component of the feedlot program that's administered through our office.
Mr. Chair, if I may, Miss Amy, when we're talking about does your land meet the requirement to stockpile manure? I don't know the answer, and I'm not looking for land services to have another job, but maybe you do, I don't know that. Do you go out and check that piece of land? Because I'm certainly gonna tell you it meets the requirements. Is somebody coming out there and actually saying it does? And if it's gonna stay there for a year and we're gonna get torrential rains and it's gonna leach off to this, does anybody, that truly was a concern by the public.
Yeah, so if stockpiling is identified by the producer, what we're looking at is we're pulling up that soil survey information because it's the type of soils that's gonna dictate that. So we're looking at what we have documented for soil types there. We're also then looking at that individual field as far as where is the well? Is there a stream that runs through there? Is there a public ditch there? And so those are the things that we are looking at and working with that producer to identify an acceptable stockpiling location. Also, the other thing is we're referring people to the Soil and Water Conservation District and to the NRCS for conversations about stacking slabs.
Yep.
We're having very frank conversations with people during the development review team meeting about manure management and about stacking slabs and other storage practices beyond stockpiling.
Mr. Chair, one question for Amy. I think I heard it a few times, just tell me if I'm wrong, at the planning commission meeting, that most of these are, where they have one barn now and they're going to two?
That's correct.
And
Each
with
one of these has
practices-
one barn.
And with practices they do, there's gonna be about the same amount of manure
So,
with two as one,
yeah,
am I right?
there's a different management regime that this company is requiring or encouraging, and that's where they're composting back the manure, so the cleanouts aren't as frequent. So the volume of manure from two barns will, and I'm not a producer, but what I've been told and what I've heard and what I understand is that there won't be nearly the volume, however, the concentration of nitrates and phosphorus in that manure may be higher. And so that's certainly something that needs to be kept a
Okay.
close eye on.
Thank you.
So will they clean out, I think my understanding is maybe they'll clean out once a year?
That's my understanding is that there won't be that total clean out between flocks like had been happening prior.
So maybe there won't be as much stacking of manure because they'll be able to clean it out when it can go on the fields.
Depending on the management practices of each producer, hopefully that is the case, but that is something, each producer is really up to their discretion on how they're going to handle that.
And Mr. Chair, I think we or were told that evening that it was the condition of the barn and the manure and what's happening and the whether that aligns perfectly with what's happening outside with the weather. That's
Right.
dependent on, they're dependent on.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
And also, once these barns are populated, they can work with Helen to get a grant to get them stacking slabs. I don't know if you were aware of that, but
Yep.
that was one of the
Yeah.
concerns that was brought up, and that they.
Yeah, once they
assured that-
establish that, then they're
And then-
eligible to be
I think it was
applied.
Mr. Cheetah that said that they don't want their manure to be or to be stored without putting it on a field because it loses its
Value.
fertilizer content.
Yep.
Helen said chicken manure is better than man-made nitrogen.
Commercial.
This is a valuable commodity for farmers. They sell chicken manure, if I'm not mistaken, because it's a valuable commodity to farmers.
Yep.
And they
They
do
don't waste
soil
it.
samples to ensure that they're not over nitrogen their fields. And I think we were pretty fortunate that night. We had 4 really good producers within Morrison County.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I think what's hard for people to understand sometimes, you have a stacking slab on the barn, but then somebody else can haul it over their place and leave it set outside for a year. It's kind of contradicting each other.
Yep.
But I did have a couple phone calls that I need to ask you about. One was the distance between a house and a Tier 2 barn. Tier 1 is 660 feet, if I'm not mistaken,
Correct.
from another resident. So when you go to a Tier 2, you've got to be 1,000 feet.
Yep, then that
But
increases to
1,000 feet
1,000.
goes from the house to the second barn, not the first barn, correct?
The barn that makes it a tier 2. So that second barn, we'd be looking at that 1,000 foot, and then any subsequent structures would need to meet that tier 2. Once they establish that tier 2, then that is their setback.
Okay, because I think he probably felt, you measure from the barn
Sure.
one, but that was only 660
Yep,
feet
and
at
that was a
that time.
tier 1 at the time.
And
yes.
another call I had is about a manure stack that's near an irrigation well. And I think there is a distance that you have to be away from those. I know the setback from the road, I think, is 300 feet
You need to be 100 feet from a well.
from a well. Okay, so, and we've checked out that stuff?
We have, and we can certainly, when that
Okay,
item comes up,
okay.
we can
Okay.
visit about
All
that
right.
one. That's not an issue with the Sweeney barn.
I don't think everybody's gonna get all these questions, but the first barn come up, so that's the questions for everybody, so. All right, we have a motion, we have a second. Any other discussion for the Sweeneys? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Okay.
The next item is to consider the conditional use permit for Donald Cheetah. And again, this is to expand to a tier 2 feedlot. And then the planning commission did recommend approval with 4 conditions. And those 4 conditions are abide by local and state law, notify road authority when hauling manure during road restrictions, abide by the good neighbor, stormwater, and feedlot odor minimization plans, and then to plant and maintain a 50-foot wide grass buffer around the perimeter of the barns after construction for ongoing stormwater management, as shown in the environmental review.
I would so move on that, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Got a motion by Commissioner Johnson, seconded by Commissioner Lemire. Okay, Commissioner Jelinski. Is there any further discussion?
Mr. Chair, I think Mr. Cheetah really, well, he actually educated me quite a bit, and evidently he's a pretty good farmer.
Is-
I guess all of the applicants that night educated me, but Mr. Cheetah really did, so.
And Mr. Chair, I'll add that Mr. Cheetah already has a stacking
Yeah,
slab,
yeah,
and so he does not stockpile his manure. He
Yep.
already utilizes a slab.
Perfect.
Okay, any other discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries.
Okay, and the third one is to consider the conditional use permit request from Galen and Carla Stumpf. And this is also to expand to a Tier 2 feedlot. This was recommended for approval by the Planning Commission with 5 conditions. And those conditions were abide by local and state law, notify road authority when hauling manure during road restrictions, abide by the good neighbor, stormwater, and feedlot odor minimization plans, plant and maintain a 50-foot wide grass buffer around the perimeter of the barns after construction for ongoing stormwater management as shown within the environmental review. And then the property owner shall contact the feedlot officer of all cleanout events.
Okay, can I get a motion to accept?
So moved.
Got a motion by
Second.
Commissioner Jelinski, seconded by Commissioner Lemire. Is there any other discussion?
One question, Mr. Chair.
Yep.
Ms. Amy, perhaps you can answer. The property owner shall contact the feedlot officer of all cleanout events. What happens?
So the discussion in the hearing was that since this facility does not have a stacking slab and does not utilize that and may stockpile, that the feedlot officer is notified of those events. So if stockpiling is going to occur, the feedlot officer is aware of it and also will be overseeing the location of that stockpile and the duration of the stockpile.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Not all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries.
All right, and then the last one I have is to consider the conditional use permit request for David and Marilyn Meyer. And this is also to expand to a Tier 2 poultry feedlot. This was recommended for approval by the Planning Commission with 5 conditions. Those conditions were abide by local and state law, notify the road authority when hauling manure during road restrictions, abide by the good neighbor, stormwater, and feedlot odor minimization plans, plant and maintain a 50-foot wide grass buffer around the perimeter of the barns after construction for ongoing stormwater management, as shown within the environmental review. And then the property owner shall contact the feedlot officer of all cleanout events.
So moved.
Got a motion by Commissioner Wincher, seconded by
Second.
Commissioner Lemire. Is there any further discussion?
Mr. Chair, we did this morning receive a complaint about the stockpiling of manure on property that Mr. Meyer owns south of this feedlot property. Feedlot officer did go out there, did verify that there is a pile. The complaint was that it's in too close a proximity to a well. What was observed was that the stockpile is by the pivot. It's unknown where the well is, though, that pivot draws from. If that well is located right underneath the pivot, we do have a setback issue. But we were not able to verify where that well was, and we were not able to get a hold of Mr. Meyer to find out where that well was. So that did come up this morning, and so we are aware of that issue.
I think, Mr. Chair, it's important that when someone calls Amy's office, Land Services, with a complaint like that, it truly is followed up on.
Oh, absolutely it is.
That's an important thing, I think, that we have to know. If somebody calls and says, hey, there's a pile of manure over here, and I don't know how long it's been there, and I don't either, nor do you, but it is looked at.
Absolutely.
And
I think
Mr.
that's
Chair, if I
important.
could, what would the result be for that?
The resolve would be moving the pile to a acceptable location.
If I may, Mr. Chair, but you, as the feedlot operators, whoever, they can't go on his property without his permission, can they, even if there is a complaint?
If we have a complaint, we do have the right to go on property to verify whether or not there's merit to that.
I think kind of an interesting question there is, you see an irrigation going into the ground, it doesn't mean the well's there.
That's
The well
correct.
can be quite a ways away,
Right.
and it's piped
Yeah.
to that area, but Yeah, it was taken care of, and we looked into
So
both issues.
that's certainly something that we'll be working with Mr. Meyer on. If you feel an added condition needs to be there, this would be the time to put that on.
I think the conditions are already there, that you gotta stockpile in the proper place. So if it's not the proper place, then he needs to be told to move it and put it in the proper place. I think I don't know what adding something else to this would do. But,
Pivot ain't spraying on it, is it?
I'm sorry?
The pivot isn't spraying on it, is it?
It wasn't when we were there. The way it's oriented, it may.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, the rain would fall on it too. So a stockpile getting wet
Oh, I
isn't.
understand.
If
yeah,
it's too close to
yeah.
the, if it's
But-
too close to a
what
well.
what he's talking about,
I'm
it
just
gets
saying,
rained
if
on
he's-
every day.
Yeah, if it's got the pivot on every day and spraying on it, it's a totally
But
different
anyway, it's
story.
being looked into.
But I don't believe that that's
Yeah.
part of the regulation in terms of what moisture it receives. It's about where it is in the soil underneath it.
Yeah.
So in theory, the soil's going to be of a certain
about-
makeup that it's okay that it gets rained on. It's a good point. I think we feel it would be different, but it's about how long it's been there and it's about what is underneath, I think, as far as the regulatory
And where it goes
component.
if it does run off.
Yeah. Mhm. That's a good question.
Is there any other discussion on this one? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Right.
And I don't know where to address this, if it's to you, but I do think that you should bring us forth some information that we can start looking at how do we determine something to do with this nitrate? Because this is a real question that both parties are right on right now. You know, we need to figure out what's the right thing to do here, because we don't want to contaminate the water. You know, that's the most precious thing we've got. And we also don't want to cut down on the agriculture. That's high agriculture area. But we have to find a good means to work with this. And I don't know, you know, we've talked about this before, but we need to do something. And I know your office is terribly busy, but you need to bring us something to say, here's what we could possibly do to start. You know, we did the septic system, so that kind of eliminates that issue. And now we need to go to some other step to start eliminating things that we know that can possibly cause that. So I don't know if we can come up with good results, but we need to be trying something.
Well, one of the things that we're doing right now is we're working with the Soil and Water Conservation District and the NRCS, because we all see manure management plans, we all deal with producers on nutrient management in some way, shape, or form. And so we're looking at a more coordinated effort, and then also utilizing our GIS tools to track a little bit better where manure is going, what fields are being claimed for transfer agreements. So that work has already begun. And then we also always have that tool of the local ordinance as far as for when it comes to density, setbacks, and things like that. And that has been something that, you know, we've certainly talked about already as far as looking at some of those things. So those things are already underway on the feedlot front.
Well, Mr. Chair, I guess I just have one more question, Ms. Haney, maybe one more thing for you. I have no idea really what I'm asking, but I know the question was brought up, or the statement was made, how many barns are too many barns? Is there any research that you can do? I can't believe that Morrison County is the first county to have that question asked.
Yes.
How many barns can be in a square mile, or how many can I have? I own this property, it's my property. What do you mean I can't build another barn? Certainly I can. I don't know the answer to that.
I think it depends on what lens you're looking at through, or if you're looking at it through a biosecurity issue.
Yeah.
Are you looking at it from a density issue? Are you looking at, so there's many different ways to look at that question. And so, we have it built into the ordinance already. We do require a 660-foot setback between feedlots, so we already kind of have established a density here, but that will vary from from county to county in the state of Minnesota as far as what's required. So that is kind of all over the place, and I don't think anyone has really put their finger on what that if there is a magical number, and what we're looking at when we are establishing density.
God bless the American farmer and the 4 farmers that were here that we spoke of today, if each one of those 4 farmers come back tomorrow and say, we want to put another barn up, it's their property. Do they meet all of the, I'm anticipating they probably do. I don't know the answer to that. That's the question that the public brought up.
Yep.
Wait a second, another one? And what about tomorrow? Can they put another one up tomorrow? It's their property. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think from a standpoint of the land use control ordinance, what we regulate for is safety, health, and welfare.
Yeah.
Those are the 3 things. That's what we try to answer with our regulations. Is this ensuring health, safety, and welfare of the general public? So that's really the measuring stick that we need to use when we're looking at
Okay.
regulations. Because that's where we fit into that puzzle.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I was down at the University of Minnesota, and there was a speaker there on water, anywhere from the Mississippi using water to groundwater to Little Rock watershed. But the thing is, with all these chicken barns and stuff, and I think I just lost my goddamn thought.
Well, it was sounding really good.
Yeah, it was really good.
Well, one might take over in case you bring it back.
Yeah, all right. Yeah.
You know, I did some answering that question, when is enough, and it seems like on the internet, when things come up, it doesn't answer that question directly. Because we have corn stalks, we have so many other things that contribute to this. Today, because we're talking about manure, that's what everybody thinks is the issue. But you know, there's other crops, there's other things, and I think in this range, going all the way from the top to the bottom, I think just geologically, that there's high nitrates in this area. Now, how we add to that, so when we deal with this on chicken barns or hog barns on one item, it's real hard to find a straight answer because there's probably 10 other things that are contributing to the exact same thing. So that's what makes this very difficult, but I do want to see what we can do to try to manage things as much as we can, because the people that are complaining about the nitrates, and they have a good reason to be complaining, because they are high.
Absolutely.
You know, and so I don't want to feel like because we approve these barns, we're overlooking the other situations. Because this is very important on both sides of this issue. And if I'm gonna restrict a barn because of nitrates, then I have to have some pretty good information to base that on, you know, so,
And I found my train of
Okay,
thought
good.
here. Anyway, I was talking to some other counties, Benton County especially,
Yes.
and I think the board would like, or I would like, they have the MPCA give all their permitting out.
Yes.
As far as the barns go and everything, so the board there is not really involved. So myself personally, I'd kind of like to see what their rules and regulations are, or do we mirror the MPCA's? And then those are things that I
Yep.
think is important
So,
from each county.
yeah, so we have the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency rules, the 70-20, which are the feedlot standards. Some, excuse me, some counties have accepted the delegation of that, which we have. So we're not only administering those minimum rules with the state, which Benton County is, we have that second layer of our local ordinance. So this conditional use permit is not a state requirement. The setbacks that we have in our ordinance are not a state requirement. That's what we have on top of the state standards. And so normally we'll see counties that don't have a lot of feedlots, they will leave that to the state to administer their own 70-20.
Right.
And so that's what our feedlot officer is for. We're administering both. And so so across the state, the minimum standard statewide that feedlot producers are held to is that state rule, which we're ensuring is happening. And then on top of that, we're also administering all of these extra things that we have in our local ordinance.
But my point is, do they just go by, does the MPCA just go by the minimum, or do they add additional standards or whatever on the permits as far as conditions? Do they do that, or they just, this is it?
No, if you have a permit application come in that meets all of the minimum state requirements,
Right.
you are granted your permit. On our very large scale feedlots, anything over 1,000 animal units or more, That is, even in Morrison County, those are under MPCA jurisdiction. Because when you hit that threshold, there are some elevated stormwater controls. Zero discharge is allowed, and the MPCA does oversee those facilities statewide. And so, no, the state does not have the ability to, like we do, to condition and to change.
So, but when MPCA, if to follow that up, if I may, when you, for instance, Benton County, it's under MPCA control, you pass their rules, end of discussion. They don't put on conditions like we do,
No,
whatever those conditions might be, doesn't matter.
correct, because they're not going through a conditional use permit process.
Exactly.
And
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, the public input, how you've responded to what you hear, all of that is part of that local control that
Exactly.
allows you to influence that has been identified as being of value by you as a board based upon what you've heard from your constituencies. So that impact is real then, instead of maybe less, relevant to the specific area.
Well, as a matter of fact, if it's MPCA control, it's matter of fact. It's done. We still do have, because we took the 70-20
Yes, correct.
rule on, we still have that authority now.
Correct.
Not make it weaker, but to make it stronger.
Correct. We can never be less restrictive than the state.
And Mr. Chair, I think this whole process really has highlighted a lot of things that, especially in a sensitive area where people are maybe thinking about things more, it certainly has impacted that. Like the amount of time somebody can stockpile, the perception is
Absolutely.
far less than what the rule is. The amount of material that can go on a field and spread, the perception of what's allowed and what we actually can measure and what we can influence is very different. Where stockpiles are, all of that is something that I think we have learned a lot about in this process, and I think based upon a sensitive area where residents are hearing and feeling so much more of an impact, it's important to have those local discussions.
Absolutely.
And then that's why, Mr. Chair, too, that down at the extension, someone brought up, well, maybe the county should let the MPCA take involvement as the county, and I did hopefully explain to them that, yeah, we do have more rules here than what the MPCA is, based on the input from our property owners in other areas. So, again, I think it's a great thing.
Amy, maybe you can answer this, maybe you can't. A soil sample. A soil sample must say that I've got so much nitrate, I got so much potassium, I don't know what it says. But if a soil sample, do we ask for soil samples on these things?
Yes, part of the manure management plan requires soil sampling. And so that's one of the requirements when you're putting together a plan, is that you know what the nutrient content in your soil is.
All right, and if it was real high in nitrates already before you started spreading, would you limit that then?
Then you'd either be looking at cropping, as far as what are you putting on there that's gonna take up some of that nitrogen. So it's the balance between
Okay.
what's the demand of the crop that I'm putting on, and then what's the nitrogen content of the soil already, and then what is the contributory factor of the nitrogen in the manure.
Good
So
try to
it's
balance
those
that
three things working together.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
I guess we have no more questions on those.
All right.
For right now.
For now.
And then I think Jean's here to do the abstract of abatements for land services.
Hello, Gene.
Hello,
Good morning, Jane.
good morning. I would just like to request approval for the abatement.
So, Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry, I need a motion. Motion by Commissioner Lemire.
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Johnson. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
All right. That's all I
Thank
have
you.
for you.
Great,
set.
thank you. Till next time.
Yes.
You guys want a little break?
I could use a coffee break.
Let's take 10 minutes and we'll go to the auditor's report. Auditor treasurer's report? We did. Good morning.
Morning, Steve.
Are we doing auditor's report right now?
No, I just was gonna just,
No, I didn't mean that, sorry.
the whole meaning of this report is probably summed up in that.
This is even on the agenda?
Yeah,
It
Yes.
is.
financial statement. publication.
You didn't read it, the 151 pages that I sent?
Just the last page.
Oh, okay. All right, This is what we have to do every year. We have to approve the publication of the 2016 financial statement. As you know, we had our exit interview last Tuesday. And I guess what we do is, we don't publish our vendor list one of the main costs, why it costs a little bit more is if we did it after every board, every time there's warrants, we'd have to publish every warrant. We do it at the end of the year.
Yep.
And that's why that list is so long, and because we do it at the end of the year. I think it saves us some money doing it that way rather than doing it every time, but it makes this report a little bit longer, so. What I handed out is, Dwayne was the only one that stayed, and he saw this, but of all this information that's probably sitting in this report, it's probably summarized the best in this one page, and it shows us where our fund balances are at. And as you can see, according to our policy, we're well within our policy, and our financial strength is in really good shape at this time, so. But I wanted the rest of you to see, if you hadn't seen this, just to point that out, that's kind of what's going on. And if you don't read anything at all, this is probably going to get you what you want to know about the financial strength of the county at this time, so. But at this time, I'll need a motion then to approve the statement, unless you have any questions in this statement. There's a lot of information here, there's a lot of time goes into this. All the departments help and work and get this
If I
to this
Move on,
point.
Mr. Chair.
For more
Motion by
discussion, I'll take a
Commissioner
second.
Johnson, we got a second by Commissioner Winchell.
On item 6, it says, discuss the following items did not rise to the level of written findings, but were felt was important enough to discuss with management. What happens to those? Is that when you guys all sit down, like some of the, there should be documentations, all bank reconcil? Do you guys sit down with that and go over that with everybody?
Well, once it's a noted item, yes, we talk about it and make changes to address those items, just like we would a written item that comes to that. They're all the same. I mean, every year they always find something
Right.
to nick us
They
on.
have to, right?
Exactly,
Well, that's their job.
yeah.
Steve, I got a question, and you may not
positive.
be able to answer this, but that's a concern of mine when they tell you that you're dinged a little bit on this one, but when they tell you that everything's fine, and then I sit on one board and we had found that 9 years they were missing something. So whose responsibility is that when you have auditors and everybody that gives you a clear bill of health, but they find things down the road that somebody missed? And then is that our responsibility then? Is that their responsibility? Is it?
Well, it's ours, but it's one of those things that, what I find in these audits is sometimes something comes up, another auditing crew finds something. And then that gets back to all the other crews around the state, and where it doesn't matter if it's private or on, but and they come up and then they'll check on it and they'll see if that's what's going on. But yeah, it's our responsibility technically to get it done, but, sometimes we think maybe we're doing it right, but go to find out it's not. And if we're not, then we'll make the changes to get it done right.
And that happens. I mean, that's one of those, you don't know what you don't know, and all of a sudden, it's brought to our attention, even though that same law existed for how long, we've been doing it the same way, nobody's ever told us that it's not right, well, then all of a sudden, somebody new starts. Or one other county had an issue, and it reminded folks, just like Steve said, that this is what we have to look for. And then there are some issues that we will always be cited for because,
Yeah.
it's impossible, well, it's not impossible, it would be way too expensive to fix, like hiring a bunch of more people just so people can triple cross-check different transactions or whatever it might be. But we're not alone in that. Like Randy from the OSA had said, this is something that nearly every organization has had a problem with because it's one of those that's really hard to fix, or the program doesn't work quite right to make it really reasonable to fix it. So we're not alone in that. Those are things that, while you don't ever want to see them because they don't exactly feel good, because they look negative, it's going to exist. And we're still being very diligent in how we process things. We're still being very careful about making sure that the T's are crossed and I's are dotted with the resources that we have.
But I think that happens in every profession that there is. If this is the way that I did it for 30 years, now the new person comes in, the new person happens to be in their 20s. And this is the archaic function that you're doing, forget it, there's a better way. And you've missed this the entire time. And quite honestly, in all respect to a mathematician, an auditor, I'm anticipating that happens all the time. Maybe not all the time, but
Well,
regularly.
there's
routinely.
every year there's something that,
Something.
in our audit that pops up that we weren't doing something the right way, and they'll write it up,
didn't know
and
I'm not
why it
asking
doesn't
what
come
we
in.
didn't do, I'm asking what the auditors said was fine that wasn't fine.
Well, they're kind of the same, they have so much
Same
time
thing.
to spot check, their job is not to look 100% at absolutely everything we do
It's
in
testing.
every situation, it's
Okay.
spot checking. And so, they may not have spot checked that before, because they either didn't know to, or it wasn't, you can only do so much in an audit. It's really about a, sampling.
Yep,
They,
okay.
they pick something every year to emphasize what they're gonna look at, and sometimes that comes from other audits, and so if they see something got wrong, they'll come in and check that in Morrison County, because they found out something wasn't doing it right in Benton County, for example, so it's not unusual, and there's always things that they'll test differently, and they don't test everything. They test 20% of our
Good.
transactions, and so there's not everything that gets, they look at all our policies, and they spend a lot of attention on, employee-type related stuff, more so than the rest, to make sure that we're following our policies as far as our reimbursements and different things like that, they spend more time on. But the rest of it is, it's testing, and it's not 100%.
Okay, thank you. All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have a budget meeting today?
Yep, 1 o'clock.
Yeah, Board of Adjustment too, today.
Good
Welcome, Deb.
morning.
Good morning, Deb.
Okay, we also have warrants on the agenda.
I would so move on the warrants.
We got a motion by Commissioner Johnson, seconded by
Second.
Commissioner Lemire. This is a roll call vote. Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Commissioner Jelinski.
Aye.
Commissioner Winchard.
Aye.
Commissioner Lemire.
Aye.
And I.
And I have 2 gambling permits. Bethany Lutheran Church to hold bingo on October 1st at the Church Hall, and Duelm Area Lions Club to hold a raffle on December 2nd at the Grubbin Pub.
Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Got a motion by Commissioner
Second.
Jelinski, seconded by Commissioner Johnson. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries.
Great, that's all I
Thank you
have.
very much.
Thank you, Deb.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Thanks, Deb.
Next, Public Works. Steve, welcome.
Morning, Steve.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, everyone. A number of items for your consideration today. I'd like to start off with our solid waste program. As a part of our solid waste program, we promote recycling efforts throughout the county in both residential and commercial. Typically, the way we've done that is we've provided grants to townships and cities and allowed them to develop their own programs and to support those recycling programs how they deem fit. Most of our small cities have established curbside recycling programs, and also we've provided grants for cleanup days for them. So they have to hold a cleanup day at least once a year, and that helps keep the costs down so that we can continue to promote that type of effort. We also, though, have been supportive of Employment Enterprises, which provides work for disabled individuals in the recycling area. And last year, we provided a grant to them to make their operations more efficient at their facility here in town. They have now asked again for another grant in order to provide boxes in the area where they do deliveries or do pickups of recyclable materials. They typically have boxes for keep the materials under cover to keep them dry and out of the rain. They've been built many, many years ago. I don't know if you've seen some of them around. They're typically painted red back behind some of the different facilities that generate recycling materials. They are requesting support in purchasing 2 of these rotomolding heavier duty boxes to replace those that are pretty well worn out and deteriorated. And so I bring that forward for your consideration on whether you would be willing to provide a grant to EEI for these boxes.
I'd make a motion
Okay, I got a
Second.
motion by Commissioner Wincher, seconded by Commissioner Lemire. Is there any further discussion?
Mr. Chair, EEI is a phenomenal organization, does a fantastic job in this community, and I will support that fully.
Any other discussion? If none, all in favor signify by saying, oh, I'm sorry, roll call. Commissioner Lemire.
Aye.
Commissioner Wincher.
Aye.
Commissioner Jelinski.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
And aye. See, you tell me 2 minutes ahead of time, and I still forget.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Got some information that will be passed around for your review.
Is this a roll call or a resolution? This is a roll call.
The two resolutions that we're requesting your consideration on, they'll be acted on individually. A number of years ago, the voters of the state of Minnesota had, through a constitutional amendment, established a 3/8 cent sales tax that was to go towards improvements for Minnesota land, water, parks, and trails. That was put into place and has generated revenues for different activities and administered through the Department of Natural Resources. In order for local units of government to access funds that are designated for parks and trails, from these funds, which are referred to as legacy funds, we need to have facilities that are regionally significant. We have a number of different pieces of property and facilities around the county that we are responsible for. And we submitted those facilities to the Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails Commission, in which they responded that 2 of our facilities had the potential to be regionally significant. That would be the Sioux Line Trail and Belle Prairie Park. In order for them then to consider providing funding for those 2 facilities, we needed to develop master plans for each one of those that would go through a public participation process, your approval, and then we will submit them through the commission for their approval, which then will allow us to make application for different projects that may be in those plans into the future. And so what we did is appointed a task force towards the end of 2016. The board maybe remember who those folks were. We had Alice Sunday representing bikes. We had David Lanners representing the ATVers. Al Stangl represented snowmobilers. Samuel Beam represented high school, our younger residents. And Paul Neiman Jr., who has a long history with Belle Prairie Park, represented townships and Belle Prairie Township. And so they met 3 times. There was an online survey conducted that we advertised, which we had about 140 respondents, where questions were asked what were important to them of the facilities. Those answers then were vetted through the task force, which also had representation from the county board and Commissioner Jelinski and Commissioner Wilson. Those answers were brought together into a draft master plan, which we presented to the board in a planning meeting, and then the board had requested that we look for more public input and comment. We held an open house, advertised that both through the radio and through the record. There was a well-written, accurate article that came out from that open house in the Morrison County Record. And then again, we posted the 2 master plans on our website, which we were requesting folks to review them and make contact to the department or to the commissioners. So we were hoping that our efforts were to get as much input for you folks that you could as we consider the adoption of the 2 plans. I provided you then here the responses that we did receive. The open house was
We had about 11 attendees at the open house. There were several comments that were received both verbally then by the commissioner at that time, and then I think also contacts directly to the commissioners. And then also we received several emails that were included here for your, and I forwarded those, so you had an opportunity to see those before now, but they're included in the packet of information. And so with that, we have the two resolutions. One is for the master plan for Belle Prairie Park, which we did receive comment at the open house that they want to see it basically kept the way it is, kept naturally, but they understand that there are things that we have to do to keep it up so that it can be used and keep our liabilities down to where they, you know, we're not exposing folks to harm out there because we're not taking widowmakers out of the pine trees and and that we maintain and manage the forest properly and those type of things. Those all take funds, and what this will do is provide us an opportunity to bring outside resources in to help accomplish that. So with that, I pass that on to you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm willing to answer any questions I could, or?
And Mr. Chair, it would be two different votes if you wouldn't mind, one for the Sioux Line and one for the Belle.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion on the Belle Prairie.
Okay, we got a motion by Commissioner Jelinski,
Second.
seconded by Commissioner Lemire. Is there any further discussion? Steve, we have to have the master plan in place in order to get any funding that would become available, correct?
Any of the legacy funding requires us to have the master plans in position. I mean, the DNR administers a broad range of grant programs. Not all of them are funded through legacy funds. And we will be doing some maintenance and repairs of the bridge over the Mississippi River. Those have been funded without going through this process. We've acquired grant funding in a different way for that. But this really opens up probably the most substantial amount of revenue for us to do some of these projects.
And Mr. Chair, and at these meetings, as I'm confident you're more than well aware, it wasn't just a meeting to just have a meeting. It was a lot of pretty heavy discussion, not exactly screaming at one another, but a stern meeting back and forth to come to a consensus on this stuff. At least that's my take on it.
Yeah, I took the same thing, I was there. I guess, somebody's had the question like, we approve these plans and what we have today on trails and things. And we get grant money to do this. What about the things that come down later, like from ADA and everything else on trails that we're required to upgrade or to pay for without grants? Is that kind of an expense does that happen? And is that an expense that we take out of where?
Well, as we move forward into selecting certain projects that may be listed in this plan, those individual projects will come to the board. I would anticipate that those type of things should be considered into the grant application, maybe even what we're after the grant for,
Okay.
is to bring them up and compliant in some of those things that it isn't at the time. We're not looking to get into this so that we're gonna make these huge expansions at Belle Prairie Park and that type of thing. What I envision this is that this opens up resources for us to maintain and keep what we have, which I think it was conveyed is looked at as a real asset to the
Very much
community.
so.
And
Very much
Mr.
so.
Chair, any infrastructure that we have at one point considered appropriate to invest in is going to have upkeep, whatever that may look like. It's not always going to be the same, so we have to assume we're gonna invest into it, but I think what Steve says is the plans that you take, that's when you consider that when you build it, when you make it, when you buy it, it's going to have some maintenance at some point down the line, but it's still quite very well could be worth it because it adds value, so.
Wouldn't that be any different than today if a law changes? You don't necessarily have to change that building or thing until you remodel or you do something adding on to it. or something like, isn't that kinda how it works now? On things?
For us, on our road projects for ADA, we're in the process of putting into place our transition plan, which again then is a requirement that we have to have in order to be able to secure federal highway dollars for our road projects. But that transition plan calls for those improvements to be made when you're in working on that project, not that you have to go in and fix all of this, but that when you are in there and you have a project going, that you do address it and bring it up to compliance at the time.
Okay, thank you. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Mr. Chairman, then the second resolution is addressed to the Sioux Line Trail, which was more controversial than Belpre Park. And the main controversy that we had, and most of the comments that you see are related to, is the recommendation by the task force that the board authorize the department to attempt to proceed to get authorization to allow all-terrain vehicles to utilize the Sioux Line Bridge over the Mississippi that they may utilize it to cross the river. Currently, it's non-motorized. So during summer months, ATVs are not legally allowed to utilize the bridge to get across. The crossing of the river would either have to take place at our County State Aid Highway 26 or here at State Highway, Trunk Highway 27 in order to legally cross the river. Certainly you can trailer them, you can do that type of thing to move them around, but you can't drive them other than across at those two locations. So this was discussed pretty extensively, and if the board were to approve this, that doesn't make that happen. All it would do is initiate a process in which we would have to work with the Federal Highway Administration to get authorization to allow us to allow ATVs to cross the bridge, because we took federal funds to pave it and improve the deck under the auspices that it would not be utilized for motorized. It could be used for snowmobiles, but it can't be used for ATVs. And that's how it's currently used. So with the adoption of this, and there's a number of things, we had the summary of what's all included in that. But the one thing that was really controversial was, should we allow ATVs to cross the bridge? And I think that is now for you to consider, because you saw the comments that there's people that don't want that to happen. They think it should be designated for bikes like it is now, and that they don't have to compete, that it's unsafe, that type of thing. So if there's any questions that you may have of me, I'm ready to answer.
I make a motion for more discussion.
Got a motion by Commissioner Winter, seconded by
Second.
Commissioner Lemire. Any further discussion?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Steve, and again, I know the answer, but could you explain, like, where, from the Sioux Line on Highway 10, if this were to be passed as to move forward with crossing ATVs, where would the ATVs go from Sioux Line all the way to Blanchard? How would they make it to that point?
Okay, maybe we could start them at the park and ride.
Okay.
So if somebody launches at the park and ride and wanted to go to Bolus,
Want to get over the river.
they want to get over the river.
Right.
The way we currently have established this, now they can get up
And
onto
if I made, the
the
park and ride is on Highway 10.
park and ride is on Highway 10.
Yeah.
So they can get up onto the Sioux Line Trail. And we previously went through the process to allow them to cross over Highway 10 and the next township road over the bridges that exist above grade. Before, they couldn't do that, about 5-6 years ago. So now they get up on Sioux Line, they can cross Highway 10, they can cross the main line of the BNSF, and they can cross the township road. We ramped it as soon as they got over the township road, so they have to exit off. They exit off of the Sioux Line Trail and they follow the north side of the the old Sioux Line grade, the embankment, up to Hilton. So currently, then what they would have to do is ride the ditch of Hilton down to 26 and cross at 26. What we would propose that, if this was approved, if we took it all the way through this approval process, we would update along the embankment west of Hilton and ramp up right before you got to the bridge. You'd get back up on the trail, you'd cross the bridge, then we'd ramp off right after you got over the bridge and you'd get off. And then you'd follow along the embankment and you'd either run the ditches of the Great River Road or the township roads that tie into it. That's how you would have to, that's how they would, and that would be the legal way for ATVs to utilize that system.
And Mr. Chair, and Steve, you're saying this is the most for safety purposes?
Well, it's not what I say. I guess this went through a lot of
Right.
debate with
Yeah.
the task force.
Okay,
And,
sure.
and I think that was the biggest
Yeah,
issue,
safety.
was the safety aspect of it, Commissioner.
okay.
And I think that in the end, the group, it was a consensus
Yeah.
that, yes, this was for safety purposes, the right
Okay.
thing to do.
Well, Mr. Chair, and Steve, you explained it, there's two ways of crossing. You can cross 26, or three ways of crossing, excuse me. You can cross on 26, or Nature Road, or Highway 27, or you can trailer them. Got it. What I'm proposing, or what I would say, is I cannot support an ATV crossing Highway 26, or County Road 26, and that bridge around those curves. Public safety speaking, that's absolutely nothing more than an accident waiting for a place to happen. The ditches are too steep, people are not gonna utilize that. They're gonna ride Highway 20, or they're gonna ride Nature Road 26, and it's simply an accident waiting for a place to happen. Of course, the argument can come right back to me, and to you, and to everybody else. Well, as soon as you put a ATV on the railroad trestle bridge, if you will, at Blanchard Dam, is there gonna be an accident there? Could be. I can't answer that question. I can answer the question that as of today, there's been not a complaint that I'm aware of on Highway 10 on the bridge crossing over. And I know there was controversy at that point too. It wasn't just a shovel ready, it's done. At the same time, if our friends with ATVs are going to be, and I'm gonna use the word disrespect, if they're gonna disrespect the crossing at the Blanchard Dam, I would anticipate that this board can say no as fast as that they can say yes, or take that away as fast as they could support it, understanding that it still has to go to the feds in order to get permission anyway to do it. That's my take on it.
So, Mr. Chair, I have one more question for Steve. Then, right now, if we would approve this, they're gonna be too short, they're gonna be coming off, across Highway 10, and then they get off, and then they'll be going on again, so they'll be on two different times, two different for short
Yes.
areas.
Yes, and if you approve the master plan, then we would work to get approval to accomplish that, but then you folks will have to change your ordinance to allow that.
If the federal government says it's okay.
Yeah.
Correct, that's the way we'd view that, that once that, if that was successful, then the next, before it could be done, it'll be a long process, but if you don't start, you don't get there, if that's what you wanna do.
We had to do it several years ago for the first part.
And the ordinance revisions require a lengthy process of discussion and
Yeah,
drafting and
absolutely.
public input and all of
And
that.
they
So
should.
it doesn't just happen by approving this. This is kind of a overall
Yep.
concept that
Big
puts in
picture.
place other steps that would be very thoroughly vetted if you were to move forward.
I guess I look at it as if they crossed the railroad bridge, they'd be getting off immediately.
Yep.
You know, and go on the trail that they belong on. But we've talked about all the work that needs to be done on that bridge. And that bridge is 110 years old.
Yes.
And I think it would be easier to get some funding if it was designated for ATVs and bicycles. I know the ATV club on the eastern Morrison County, they raise a lot of money to work on that trail, and it's an awful nice trail they've got. And I'm sure they'd help contribute to working on the bridge if need be. And I think that's an important part. I mean, you know, when I look at that bridge, I'm looking at, the odds are there'd be signs there 5 miles an hour or whatever that may be. It's not just like it's gonna be left over, you know, but all the four-wheelers for a place to go and look over the bridge, I think that's just as important. You know, we had in our discussion about tar going east of the bridge, you know, like all the way on the trail. And the point was there, if that happens, then the bicyclers may want to use that all the time too. And then you start fighting over whose trail is it, you know? So I do think it's important that we allow both of them to go over that trail. I think money will come along with that when we're applying for projects because we have more added to it. And if for some odd reason it wouldn't work out, I'd be in favor of taking it away if it absolutely didn't work out. But when I four-wheeler, and we even meet other four-wheelers, everybody slows down. You know, they slow down dramatically, you know, so I just, I don't see a big problem with it except wanting to be a problem, you know, so. That's my 2 cents, I guess.
I agree. I think that the multimodal concept and it does provide a better opportunity for us to bring outside resources in.
And if I may look at down in the cities, Mr. Chair, you got bicyclists right along big trucks, buses, they got bike routes there. So again, you know, there, the bikes can drive amongst a lot larger. I don't see this as being a problem.
I think, you know, I think in this day and age and where we are and right of way and what it takes to try to develop something like this, if we can't get bikes and ATVs and these folks to be compatible and work together, then we're not gonna go anywhere with this.
Absolutely.
Because we can't have a separate trail for everybody that wants to do something separately. You know, we have to learn that if we have these trails, which some people question whether we should have it all, you know, because they do take a lot of funding. We have to work together to use these things together. That's just the way it is. So, okay, do we have any other discussion? Otherwise, we have a motion on the floor to allow to go across
Approve the master plan.
master plan for the sewer line. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
That's all I have.
That was it, Steve? Well,
Okay.
Yes,
thank
sir.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Steve.
We'll see you at
Thanks.
1.
Okay, that's right. We'll see you.
Yeah, this is Tuesday.
That was deer in the headlights. What?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, administrators report.
All right, Mr. Chair, I don't have a lot for consideration that I need actual action on, except for an agreement proposed by City Hall for holding our county meetings in City Hall chambers. As you know, we're going to be beginning our renovation, hopefully end of this year, beginning of next year. We'll know more as the process moves forward. But in talking to John Rademacher and the mayor, they're more than willing and open to allowing us to utilize their facility, which is greatly appreciated. And Tabitha has worked with them on getting the details on what it takes to reserve the room, in particular the chambers. They do have other meeting room facilities and whatnot, so we're able to direct staff and other agencies that normally would hold meetings here to be able to offer them different options. But one component that got brought up is their policy right now only allows it for business hours. And as you know, some of our meetings are after business hours. And so we talked about what it would take to allow for that exception. We certainly don't want to have the city incur additional costs by having to staff it in the evenings or anything like that. But John and the powers that be were comfortable with training a few of us that would normally attend those meetings on how to lock up, on how to make sure we treat their facility as it needs to be treated to ensure that there's no extra liability. And so that is what I have before you. We'll define the specifics as we move forward administratively, but just want you as a board to be okay with assuming that and accepting that liability, and we'll work with them. There'll be a handful of staff that will be identified to help close up. I'd imagine myself, Amy, planning and zoning, or land services conducts a lot of evening meetings, things like that. So we'll have a number of staff that'll be equipped to deal with the logistics of utilizing City Hall, and it was greatly appreciated that they're allowing this opportunity. So, your consideration of approval for that would be great.
Can I get a motion on that?
So moved.
Motion by
Second.
Commissioner Jelinski, seconded by Commissioner Johnson. Is there any further discussion?
Mr. Chair, you know, we discussed this a couple of years ago. Maybe this is an opportunity, again, I appreciate the city of Little Falls, but since we're gonna be kind of moving over there, maybe, I don't know, just throwing this out there, if maybe peers would like to have a board meeting out there, or any, I just thought maybe that would be an opportunity for us just to move around a little bit.
And on that comment, my first few years on the board, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, we did move around. And the reason we quit is because
No, it isn't.
the kids weren't coming to the meetings.
Right.
And we did it for the students, you know, to learn county government. And I think, am I right, Deb?
Yep,
why it went
that's
away.
always one of those great ideas. I think the actual result proves to be a little less than what we would like to see because we want people to attend. One of the components that this day and age comes into play is the technology that's associated with various locations. If you want to continue to provide that recording, and that then is on our website and on YouTube, that we're able to then reach more audience with if they're not able to attend the actual meetings, but take a look at it after the fact. Little Falls is equipped nicely to do that. There are a lot more logistical components if we are someplace that isn't already wired and capable of those technology components. So, in theory, wonderful idea, hasn't proven to be as effective as what we'd like, I think, in the past, but the technology component is something to consider.
I would say still, if we approve this here, we still have that option.
Absolutely.
Sure.
To
We
go
absolutely
outside if we
do.
want to,
You
so.
move around.
Absolutely.
You bet.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries.
And kind of on that note, technology is an issue. That projector has caused
You know that one?
significant amount of problems
The
for
wall, you
us
mean?
lately. It isn't working, obviously. Shocker. And to invest in fixing it, I'm just wondering if you guys are okay if we leave it. This one is working, this one will be available. It is intermittent, it's sporadic, it's going to not exist after we move and are not using this area anymore, which is scheduled to be in the next few months. So if, just letting you know that it's not like we're unaware of the fact that it's not working or excited about it, it's
So did
just
Joe
that.
from IT, did he try tinkering with it, or Kurt, or any of them?
Yeah, we've had them in, we've had Radio Shack in, who's wired all of it. It's an old projector. It's going on, what is it, 15, 20 years old. I mean, it's old. It's definitely served its purpose and not going to exist when we move. But I really am, it seems kind of silly maybe to invest even hundreds of dollars in time into it when it's not going to
It seems
exist
really
later.
silly. I think this would be good enough.
Yeah,
That's my.
and if you're okay with that, that's what, okay, all right, that is that. The craft fair is this coming weekend, so hopefully the parking lot is done. But we may still have some areas roped off, they have planned for that, so they don't have vendors set up within the actual, on the lawn, or what now would be on the pavement. But they do have it in the parking lot south of the historic courthouse, so we'll continue to operate. That's always a fun day, making sure everybody gets out safely and in safely that afternoon. But it's been planned for, and hopefully everything goes okay with that. I don't anticipate any issues, but just so you know, we'll be on top of it and watching it. So if you hear anything, let me know. Otherwise, that's what I have for now. If
Anybody
anybody's
got
waiting on
anything
anything from me, let me know.
Okay, committee reports. Who would like to go first? Okay, Dwayne?
Sure.
Dates are September 10th through September 23rd.
Okay, through 23rd. Monday the 11th, I got yellow ribbon at 5:30, and she's gonna check, I'm not sure where it's at. So Tabitha's gonna check on that. We have planning on the 12th at 8:30, budget at 1, and a public hearing on ditch number 1 at 7 PM on Tuesday. The 14th and 15th, we've got a AMC policy committee, right?
Yep.
That's what it's called, right, at Breezy Point, Thursday and Friday. And on Friday, I got a Mississippi Headwaters board meeting at Breezy Point at like, it's Well, it's about noon, 11:30, 12, or 12:30. When it gets over, then we're having ours. And then on 17th, on Sunday is Camp Ripley open house and retirement party.
What time is that start doing?
The open house is most of the day. There's a program for change of command at 1:30, and then 3:30 the other starts. Then on 19th, we have board, and Commissioner Wilson and I have community development at 12:15. And that's a day of the water festival at
Camp Ripley.
Camp Ripley. So that was discussed
We need
earlier.
to talk
And
about
do
that.
we want to
we-
look at the meeting time on that? And change
Yeah.
it to begin at 10?
10
30?
10:30, I think we should have our board meeting that day because Camp Ripley starts at 9. We've got to be there to start that out. And so probably 10:30 would be a good time to,
10:30.
On the 19th.
on the 19th,
On the 19th.
for the board meeting.
We will work with that. We have a number of outside folks coming in, but I assume that won't be a problem, but we'll let them know well ahead of time and probably begin that communication now to let them know.
Because we don't have budget after that, do we?
No.
No, we do not.
No, is it?
No. Mike, you and I have public health on the 20th. Do you have it down there?
I don't have it down here, no.
Okay, well, I'm thinking we do, but I'm not sure. Okay, and that kind of takes care of all of mine.
Okay.
The 13th. Did you have anything on the 13th?
No, nothing in 13.
I think there's a department head meeting.
Oh, is there? Okay.
No,
Yeah,
I'm just saying. Ready?
Yep, go ahead, Jeff.
On the 11th, I've actually got two meetings and they're pretty much at the same time. There's a public safety meeting, meeting room 1, that's at 6:30. And there's also a Camp Ripley Veteran State Trail meeting at the City of Little Falls, and I believe, if I'm reading it correctly, that just came to me this morning. That's at 6:50 or 7 o'clock. Tuesday, I wasn't paying enough attention to Dwayne. I think we got a planning meeting. Got a Towards Zero Death meeting at Public Health at noon. Budget, you must have said the ditch. Department head on the 13th. On the 14th at 5:30 in the evening, I have a trails meeting at the fort. Water Festival. On the 20th at 5 o'clock in the evening, meeting room 3, I've got Hands of Hope. On the 21st, at 10 o'clock in the morning, I've got an Armor meeting, owners and operators in Alexandria. At 7:30 that evening, I've got Egg Society. And that's it.
On the 11th, I'll be at the township meeting in Little Falls at 7 o'clock
PM?
PM, yep. And and on the 21st, I'll go back on the 20th. I have a Great River Regional Library meeting on Wednesday the 20th, and that's usually at 6 o'clock. And then on the 21st, Mike and I are at TCC at 4:30 here in Little Falls, and that covers that.
19th at 11:30, community health assessment. Probably won't